My name is Iris Thorne. To the world of high-end architecture, I was the girl who delivered the coffee and carried the heavy rolls of vellum for the real geniuses. To my father, Silas Thorne, I was a logistical necessity, a courier with a biological link he refused to acknowledge. My brother, Leo, had the degrees, the expensive suits, and the seat at the head of the table, but he lacked the one thing that makes a building breathe: spatial intuition. For years, I watched them build a legacy on my ideas, whispering corrections into Leo's ear so he wouldn't look like a fool in front of clients. I thought loyalty would eventually earn me a seat at the drafting board. I was wrong. At the firm's 50th anniversary gala, I learned that in the house my father built, I was nothing more than a ghost in the drywall. But my mother, a woman who understood structural integrity better than any of us, left me a secret foundation. And tonight, I'm going to pull the rebar out from under them. Architecture is the art of knowing exactly how much weight a structure can bear before it collapses. My father spent 40 years calculating the load-bearing capacity of steel, but he never bothered to calculate mine. The ballroom of the Grand Excelsior was a sea of black ties and champagne flutes. On the walls, massive projections displayed the Thorne legacy, 5 decades of skyscrapers that redefined the city's skyline. My father, Silas, stood on the stage, his silver hair catching the spotlight. He looked like a king surveying his kingdom. "Tonight, we don't just celebrate the past," Silas boomed, his voice echoing with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. "We celebrate the future. It is my greatest honor to announce that Thorne & Sons is officially passing the torch. My son, Leo Thorne, will take over as CEO and lead architect. And to ensure our family stays close to the heart of the business, my daughter, Iris, will be granted a permanent position." I felt a spark of hope. Was this it? A junior partnership? A design lead? As our senior logistics coordinator, we've even prepared a dedicated workspace for her, a quiet corner in the archives where she can manage our historical records without distraction. The room erupted in polite applause. I stood near the catering station, frozen. A dedicated workspace in the archives? He meant the windowless sub-basement where the old blueprints went to rot. He had just publicly demoted me to a glorified filing clerk in front of every major developer in the country. I looked at Leo. He was grinning, shaking hands with a billionaire real estate mogul. He didn't need to. He had my sketches for the Viridian Tower in his portfolio, rebranded as his magnum opus. "You okay, Iris?" a voice whispered. It was Ben, the firm's oldest model maker. He was the only one who knew that I was the one who solved the wind vibration issues on the Tokyo project. "I'm fine, Ben," I said, my voice as cold as the marble pillars around us. "I just realized that my father's measurements were off. He thinks I'm a partition wall. He doesn't realize I'm the load-bearing core." I left the gala before the main course was served. I didn't go home. I went to the one place Silas Thorne had forgotten, my mother's old studio in the hills. My mother, Elena, had died when I was 12. She was the Thorne in the original firm's name, the brilliant engineer who made Silas's aesthetic dreams physically possible. I found the small black lacquer box she had left me in her will. At the time, Silas had dismissed it as sentimental jewelry, but tonight I remembered the way she used to look at me, as if she was seeing a blueprint I hadn't yet drawn. Inside, beneath a layer of old photographs, were a series of original patent certificates. My breath hitched. These weren't just patents. These were the green core technologies that Thorne & Sons was currently using to pitch the Aether High-Rise, a $3 billion project that was supposed to be the world's first truly carbon-neutral skyscraper. The entire pitch relied on Thorne proprietary ecosystems. But they weren't Thorne proprietary. They were mine. Elena had filed them 10 years before she died, naming me as the sole owner upon my 25th birthday. A birthday that had passed 3 days ago, while I was busy delivering Leo's lunch. He built his future on a lie, and he forgot to check the title deed. I spent the rest of the night in the sub-basement, not filing papers, but auditing every single contract Thorne & Sons had signed in the last 5 years. Because I was the courier, I had access to every document, every digital key, and every mailing list. They treated me like furniture, and furniture hears everything. I discovered that the Aether project wasn't just a building, it was a gamble. Silas had leveraged the entire family estate and the firm's remaining assets to secure the construction loans. The project's viability was 100% dependent on the eco-technology patents. Without them, the building was just an illegal, over-budget pile of glass. At 4 a.m., I sent a single encrypted email to the firm's legal department and the city's building commission. I didn't sign it as Iris Thorne, the daughter. I signed it as the holder of intellectual property rights. The subject line was immediate cease and desist, unauthorized use of bioregenerative patents. The next morning, the office was in chaos. I arrived at my usual time, carrying a tray of coffees. I walked past the frantic secretaries and the lawyers screaming into their phones. I walked straight into the boardroom where Silas and Leah were staring at a legal notice that had just frozen their biggest project. "Iris, where have you been?" Leo snapped, his face pale. "We've got a legal glitch with the Aether project. Some ghost company is claiming they own the air filtration tech. Find the original filing in the archives, now." I didn't move. I placed the coffees on the table, one for Silas, one for Leo. "I already found it, Leo," I said, leaning back against the glass wall that overlooked the city I helped design. "But you won't like the filing. It turns out the ghost company is me." Silas looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Don't play games, Iris. This is a billion-dollar crisis, whatever little stunt you're pulling." "It's not a stunt, Father," I interrupted, pulling a physical copy of the patent from my bag and sliding it across the mahogany table. "It's a structural correction. You gave Leo the firm, you gave me the sub-basement, but Mother gave me the foundation. And as of 9 a.m. this morning, I have officially revoked Thorne & Sons' license to use any of my biotechnologies." The silence in the room was deafening. I could practically hear the sounds of their billion-dollar skyscraper beginning to crack.
My dear ones, thank you for listening to this story. It makes me incredibly happy to feel that you are here with me. I try my best for you and post new videos every day, putting a piece of myself into them. If my stories resonate with you, your subscription and viewing of other videos will be the warmest support for me and inspiration to continue telling stories.
The problem with building a throne out of stolen blueprints is that the architect always knows where the weak points are. The silence in the boardroom after my announcement wasn't the silence of peace. It was the pressurized quiet before a skyscraper's glass facade shatters under a Category 5 hurricane. My father, Silas, didn't move. He didn't scream. He just stared at the patent certificates as if he could set them on fire with his eyes. "Iris," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, "I don't know what kind of grief-induced delusion you're suffering from, but these patents are company property. Your mother was an employee of Thorne & Sons. Anything she created belongs to the firm, to me." "Check the filing date, Father," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering a rhythm of pure defiance. "She filed these 3 years before the merger that created the current corporate entity. She filed them under a private holding company, Elena's Reach, and the bylaws of that holding company state that ownership transfers to me, not to any successor of Thorne & Sons." Leo, whose face had gone from pale to a blotchy, panicked red, slammed his fist on the table. "This is blackmail. We have a $3 billion contract signed. The steel is already being forged in Germany. You can't just revoke a license that we've been using for years." "I can when that license was granted based on a forged signature," I countered, sliding a second folder across the table. "I spent last night in the archives, Leo. I found the authorization you submitted to the building commission last year. You tried to mimic Mother's handwriting, but you forgot one thing. She was left-handed. The slant of your E is all wrong. It's not just a patent dispute anymore. It's fraud." Silas finally looked up. The predatory mask was back in place. "You think you're so smart, Iris. You think you can take down this firm? If Thorne & Sons falls, you fall with it. Your archives job, your apartment, your name, it's all tied to the success of the Aether. If I can't build it, you have nothing." "I've had nothing for 10 years, Father. I've lived in the shadow of a brother who can't calculate a loading-bearing curve without my help. I've been a courier for my own ideas. Losing my archives job isn't a threat, it's a promotion." I stood up, leaving the coffees untouched. "You have 24 hours to issue a public statement that the Aether project is on hold due to intellectual property reevaluation. If you don't, I'll take the fraud evidence to the district attorney." I walked out of the office, feeling the eyes of the entire staff on my back. They knew something had shifted. The air in the building felt different, thinner, colder. I went back to my mother's studio. I needed a place where the walls didn't feel like they were closing in. But as I pulled into the driveway, a sleek silver sedan was already parked there. A woman in a charcoal suit, sharp as could cut glass, was leaning against the door. Vesper Vance, the CEO of Vance Global Construction, my father's greatest rival, and the woman who lost the Aether bid to him by a fraction of a percent. "Iris Thorne," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I heard there was a seismic event at Thorne & Sons this morning, magnitude 8.0, centered right in the boardroom." "News travels fast," I said, keeping my distance. "In this city, architectural gossip travels at the speed of light, especially when it involves a billion-dollar project hitting a legal brick wall. I know about the patents, Iris. I know what your mother was working on. She was a decade ahead of everyone else." Vesper stepped closer, handing me a digital tablet. It was a contract. "I don't want to buy your patents, Iris. I want to buy you. Join Vance Global. I'll give you your own division. We'll take your green core tech, and we'll build a tower that makes the Aether look like a mud hut. But there's a catch. There's always a catch with you, Vesper. You have to testify, not just about the patents, but about the structural flaws Silas has been hiding in his older projects. We know he's been using substandard concrete in the waterfront developments to save costs. Give me the proof from the archives, and I'll help you burn Thorne & Sons to the ground. You'll be the queen of the new skyline, and Silas will be a footnote in a bankruptcy filing." I looked at the contract. It was everything I had ever wanted: recognition, power, and the chance to finally show the world what I could do. But as I looked at the technical specs Vesper was proposing, I saw the same ruthlessness I saw in my father. She didn't care about the architecture, she cared about the conquest. "I'll think about it," I said. "Don't think too long. The cleaners are already at your father's office. If you have anything in that sub-basement archives you want to keep, you'd better get it now. Leo isn't just a bad architect, he's a desperate one." Vesper was right. As night fell, I felt a strange urge to check the firm's remote servers. I logged in using a back door I'd created years ago when I was bored between Courier runs. I watched in real time as a user, L.Thorne, tried to access the Elena folder. He was trying to delete the original high-resolution scans of the patents. He was trying to erase the digital trail. "Too late, Leo," I whispered, watching my screen. I had already moved the files to a decentralized cold storage drive. Suddenly, my screen flickered. A video feed from the sub-basement archives popped up. Leo was there, physically tearing through boxes, throwing my mother's old sketches onto the floor. He looked like a madman. He found a canister of lighter fluid in the janitor's closet. "No," I gasped. He wasn't just trying to delete the files, he was going to burn the evidence. The physical blueprints, the original calculations, the hand-drawn sketches that were the only things I had left of my mother's touch. I grabbed my keys and raced back to the city. I didn't care about the patents in that moment. I cared about the history. I arrived at the Thorne building just as the smoke detectors started to wail. I burst through the back entrance, heading straight for the sub-basement. The air was thick with the smell of burning paper, a smell that felt like the death of 1,000 ideas. I found Leo standing in the middle of the archive room, a small fire licking at the edge of a mahogany filing cabinet. He was staring at the flames, his face twisted in a mixture of fear and triumph. "It's gone, Iris," he screamed over the alarm. "Without these papers, you're just a girl with a story and no proof. Dad was right. You're nothing without this building." I didn't answer. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall and doused the flames. The room was filled with white foam and acrid smoke. I pushed past Leo and reached into the charred cabinet. The patents were gone. The sketches were ash. But as I pulled back the false back of the cabinet, a detail my mother had built into all her furniture, I saw it. A small titanium-cased drive. "You were always so focused on the visible drawings, Leo, but Mother taught me that the most important parts of a building are the ones you can't see, the invisible blueprints. This drive contains the 20-year stress test data for every Thorne building in the city, and Vesper Vance was right. The concrete is failing." I looked at my brother, who was now trembling. "You didn't just burn my inheritance, Leo. You burned your only leverage. Now I don't just own the future, I own the past, and I'm going to make sure the world knows exactly what kind of foundation you've been standing on." I walked out of the smoking basement, leaving him in the dark. As I reached the lobby, my phone buzzed. A text from Silas. "Come to the penthouse. We need to talk as partners."
The most dangerous vibration isn't the one that shakes the ground. It's the one that shakes your faith in the people who raised you. As I rode the private elevator to the Thorne penthouse, the city below looked like a fragile circuit board. From the 80th floor, the Thorne developments stood out like monuments to ego, their glass skins reflecting a sunset that looked like spilled blood. The elevator doors hissed open, revealing a room that was more a museum of Silas's achievements than a home. My father was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand. He didn't look like a man whose empire was crumbling. He looked like a man who was about to explain why the collapse was necessary. "You have your mother's eyes, Iris," he said, not turning around, "but you have my stubbornness. It's a volatile structural mix." "I have the data, Father," I said, staying near the door. "I know about the quick-set concrete in the 2012 projects. I know why the waterfront plaza is sinking 2 millimeters every month. You didn't just build buildings, you built ticking time bombs." Silas turned, and for a second I saw a flash of something that looked like genuine grief. Do you think I wanted that? Your mother discovered the degradation first. She realized the chemical bond in the recycled aggregate we used was unstable, but she also realized that if we admitted it then, the entire city's economy would have defaulted. Insurance would have pulled out. Thousands of families would have lost their homes in a mass evacuation. He walked to a mahogany desk and pulled out a small analog cassette tape, a relic from a different era. She recorded this the night she died. She told me to keep the secret until the green core technology was ready to retrofit the foundations. She sacrificed her reputation to prevent a panic. I've just been following her blueprint. I took the tape, my hands trembling. If Silas was telling the truth, then my mother wasn't a victim, she was a co-conspirator. My entire crusade for justice would be a betrayal of her final wish. Partners, Iris, Silas whispered, stepping closer. We use your patents to fix the old buildings. We call it a scheduled modernization. No one has to know about the concrete. We save the firm, we save the city, and you finally get the office next to mine. I left the penthouse with the tape burning a hole in my pocket. I went back to my mother's studio, the only place where I felt I could breathe. I found an old Walkman in a drawer and pressed play. The hiss of the tape filled the room, then her voice. Silas, if you're listening to this, it means the cracks have reached the surface. You'll try to tell Iris that I agreed to the silence. You'll tell her I was afraid of the panic, but the truth is, I was afraid of you. I gasped, my heart stopping. The concrete wasn't an accident. You swapped the specs to pay off the council. I have the original receipts hidden in the invisible blueprints drive. Iris, if you find this, don't let him use my name to anchor his lies. A building without an honest foundation cannot be saved. It must be brought down. The tape ended with a sharp click. Suddenly, the floor beneath my feet surged. A low, guttural roar echoed through the hills. It wasn't a large earthquake, maybe a 4.2, but in a city built on defective beton, even the jolt of a truck can be fatal. I looked out the window toward the skyline. The lights of the waterfront plaza flickered and died. A cloud of dust rose from the harbor. "The resonance," I whispered. "It's starting." My phone exploded with notifications. Vesper Vance was calling. Leo was calling. The city emergency services were issuing alerts, but I only answered one call. Marcus, the head of the construction crew at the Aether site. "Iris, the 4.2 hit the harbor hard. The waterfront tower, the north pylon just sheared. We have 300 people trapped in the upper restaurant. The structural sensors are screaming red. The Thorn engineers are saying it's a localized anomaly, but the concrete is crumbling like sand." "Don't listen to the Thorn engineers, Marcus. They're reading from a script. I'm coming to the site." I drove like a maniac through the panicked streets. People were pouring out of buildings, eyes turned toward the darkening sky. When I reached the waterfront tower, the scene was horrific. The beautiful glass lobby was a jagged graveyard of shards. The building was leaning, just a few degrees, but enough to jam the elevator tracks. I saw my father's black SUV pull up. He stepped out, looking at the tower with a cold, analytical detachment. Leo was beside him, looking like he was about to vomit. "We have to issue a statement, Dad. We have to say it was an act of God." "It was an act of greed, Leo," I shouted, pushing through the crowd. Silas looked at me, his eyes dead. "You have the tape, Iris. You know what needs to be done. Tell the press that the green core retrofit was in progress. Frame it as a tragic delay, not a structural crime." "The tape doesn't say what you think it says, Father," I said, pulling out my tablet and connecting it to the emergency broadcast van's external speakers. "Mother didn't leave me a blueprint for a cover-up. She left me an audit." I didn't wait for his permission. I hit play on the digital copy of the real recording. Her voice boomed over the plaza, drowning out the sirens. Thousands of people, including the trapped residents' families and the circling news crews, heard Elena Thorne's final testimony. They heard about the spec swapping. They heard about the bribes. They heard the truth about the ground they were standing on. "You're insane!" Leo lunged for the tablet, but the crowd blocked him. The people were no longer looking at the building. They were looking at Silas Thorne with a collective, silent rage. "The building is going to fail in 60 minutes, I said, looking my father in the eye. "I've analyzed the shear stress. The north pylon is gone. The only thing holding it up is the central elevator core, and that's cracking." "Then we're done," Silas whispered, his shoulders finally slumping. "You've killed the firm, Iris. Are you happy?" "I'm not done," I said. "I'm the only one who knows the resonance frequency of this specific concrete. I can stabilize the core using the Aether's kinetic dampers, the ones Leo has sitting in the warehouse. If we move them now, we can buy enough time for the evacuation." "That's impossible," Leo stammered. "Those dampers aren't calibrated for an old building." "They are if you have the invisible blueprints." I held up the titanium drive. "Marcus, get the heavy lift cranes. We're not building a skyscraper today. We're performing an emergency heart transplant." For the next 55 minutes, the world watched a masterclass in architectural desperation. Under my direction, the Vance Global crews and the Thorne workers, unified by the sheer terror of the situation, bolted the massive green core dampers directly onto the sagging skeleton of the waterfront tower. I was on the gantry, my hands covered in grease and dust, calculating the counter vibrations in real time. Each time the building groaned, I adjusted the frequency. "Stabilizing," I shouted into the radio. "Core integrity at 45%, 50%, 60%. The leaning stopped. The elevators groaned back to life, the manual overrides finally clearing the jammed tracks. People began to pour out of the lobby, frightened, crying, but alive. When the last person was out, I stepped down from the gantry. The sun was rising over the harbor, illuminating a city that would never look the same. Vesper Vance walked up to me, her expression unreadable. "You saved the building, Iris, but you destroyed the man. Your father has just been taken into custody, so has Leo." "I didn't destroy them, Vesper," I said, looking at the cracked foundation of the tower. "The physics did. I just stopped pretending the gravity didn't exist." Vesper Vance handed me a new contract. "The city is going to condemn every Thorne building. They need someone to oversee the great reconstruction, someone who knows where the bodies and the bad concrete are buried. The board wants you, Iris, not as a partner, as the architect-in-chief." I looked at the contract, then at the smoking ruins of my family's reputation. "I'll take the job," I said, "but on one condition. We rename the firm. From now on, it's not Thorne and Sons, it's the Elena Foundation."
The weight of a crown is nothing compared to the weight of 50,000 lives hanging by a single structural thread. My first week as the architect-in-chief of the Elena Foundation didn't feel like a victory. It felt like an autopsy. The city council was in a state of frantic preservation, pushing for the immediate demolition of all 42 Thorne standard developments. "It's a liability nightmare, Eris," the mayor said, slamming a file onto my desk. "The public is terrified. Every time a truck drives by, people in the East District think their ceiling is coming down. We need to clear the land and start over." "You can't just clear 50,000 people, Mayor," I countered, pointing to the structural map of the city. "If you demolish these buildings, you don't just lose housing, you collapse the local economy. My green core technology can stabilize the aggregate. I can heal the concrete from the inside using a process of carbon mineralization. But I need the catalyst." "The catalyst?" "Lonsdale Light Silica," I said. "It's a rare mineral compound that triggers the self-healing properties in the biomembrane. Without it, the patents are just theoretical." I didn't tell him the rest. I didn't tell him that the only person who owned the rights to the world's largest supply of that mineral was Julian Vane, my mother's former partner, and the man my father had betrayed to build Thorne & Sons. To save the city, I had to walk into the lion's den. Julian Vane lived in a secluded fortress on the coast, a brutalist masterpiece of raw concrete and jagged glass. He hadn't spoken to a Thorne in 20 years. "You have your father's arrogance to come here, heiress," his voice like grinding gravel. He was sitting in a wheelchair, looking out at the ocean that was slowly eroding his private beach. "Silas stole my research, ruined my reputation, and married the only woman I ever loved. And now you want my minerals to fix his mistakes?" "I don't want them for Silas, Julian. He's in a cell. I want them for the people living in the waterfront projects. I want them for Elena's legacy. She died trying to fix this." "She died because Silas pushed her too hard," Julian hissed, "and now you're doing the same. You're trying to play God with physics. Why should I help you save a city that stood by and watched while I was erased?" "Because if you don't, the story ends with Silas being the man who accidentally ruined a city. But if you help me, the story ends with you being the man who saved it. Give me the supply, and I'll put the Vane name back on the map, not as a footnote, but as the foundation." Julian looked at me for a long time. "I'll give you the mineral, but only if you can prove that you're better than Silas. I want an integrity test. If your green core fails to stabilize the West Pier in 48 hours, the contract is void, and I'll buy the Thorne ruins for pennies on the dollar." I spent the next 48 hours on the West Pier, a crumbling industrial pier that was the patient zero of my father's corruption. If I could fix this, I could fix anything. But as the mineralization process began, a new threat emerged. From his prison cell, Leo had managed to leak a series of confidential emails to the press. The headlines were devastating. "The architect's accident?" Leaked emails suggest heiress Thorne triggered waterfront collapse to seize power. Leo had doctored the timestamps of our old conversations, making it look like I'd known about the seismic risk and intentionally delayed the warnings to create a hero moment. "Heiress, the council is wavering," Vesper called me, her voice tense. "The public is turning. They're calling you the vulture of the skyline. If the West Pier doesn't hold, they're going to arrest you for corporate sabotage." "The pier will hold, Vesper. The chemistry doesn't care about politics." But the chemistry was being sabotaged. On the second night, Marcus found a series of bleed valves installed on our injection pumps. Someone was draining the Lonsdaleite silica into the harbor before it could reach the concrete. "It's an inside job," Marcus whispered, showing me the specialized wrench used to open the valves. "Only a Thorne engineer would know where these lines are." I looked at the wrench. It had a small, familiar engraving, LT. Leo wasn't just leaking emails, he was using his old network of loyalists to destroy the project from within. He would rather see the city crumble than see me succeed where he failed. "He thinks I'm still playing by the Thorne standard," I said, a cold, sharp clarity settling over me. "Marcus, stop the pumps." "What? If we stop now, the mineralization will fail. The pier will collapse." "Let it. But not the whole pier, just the section where Leo's loyalists are hiding. We're going to perform a controlled failure." I spent the next hour recalibrating the sensors. I didn't hide the leak, I channeled it. I used the invisible blueprints to find the one structural node that was already beyond a save. At 3 a.m., the pier groaned. A 50-foot section of the outer dock slid quietly into the water. In the morning light, the news crews saw something they hadn't expected. They didn't see a failure of my technology. They saw the bleed valves exposed in the wreckage, still dripping with the expensive mineral. I stood on the edge of the remaining rock-solid pier and held a press conference. My brother wants you to believe that I am the architect of this disaster, but as you can see, the disaster was manufactured. The West Pier is standing. It's stronger than it's been in 20 years. The part that fell was the part that was sabotaged. My father built a culture of silence. My brother built a culture of destruction. I am building a culture of evidence. The public's mood shifted instantly. The doctoring of the emails was traced back to a shell company Leo had set up from prison. The vulture became a survivor. Julian Vane arrived at the pier that afternoon. He walked with a cane now, testing the surface of the mineralized concrete. "The resonance is perfect," he muttered. "It's like stone, but it breathes. Elena would have been proud, Eris, not because you saved the building, but because you used the truth as your aggregate." He handed me the master deeds to the Lonsdale Light mines. "The city is yours to rebuild, but remember, a foundation of truth is the hardest one to maintain. There will always be someone trying to pour a little salt into your mix." I looked to the city skyline. It was no longer a monument to my father's ego. It was a giant urban patient, and I had finally found the medicine. But as I looked towards the prison where Silas and Leo were held, I received a final message from an unknown number. "You saved the pier, Eris, but you forgot to check the Aether site. The steel we ordered, it wasn't just forged in Germany. It was forged with a self-destruct clause. Check the bolts."
My dear ones, thank you for listening to this story. It makes me incredibly happy to feel that you are here with me. I try my best for you and post new videos every day, putting a piece of myself into them. If my stories resonate with you, your subscription and viewing of other videos will be the warmest support for me and inspiration to continue telling stories.
Engineering is the science of precision, but sabotage is the art of the hidden flaw. I stood on the 40th floor gantry of the Aether high-rise, the wind whipping my hair as the city lights stretched out like a glowing carpet below. On paper, the project was a triumph. The green core was stabilizing the structure, and the public was finally beginning to trust the Thorn name again, or rather, the Elena name. But as I ran the ultrasound scanner over the primary load-bearing bolts, the screen didn't show the steady green of solid steel. It showed a flickering, unstable amber. "Marcus, tell me I'm misreading the molecular density," I said into my headset. "You're not, Eris." Marcus's voice was grim. He was in the lab, 3 floors down. We ran a thermal stress test on a sample bolt we pulled from the north wing. It's not standard high-tensile steel. It's a nitinol-doped alloy. At exactly 32 degrees Celsius, the average temperature of a summer afternoon in this city, the alloy undergoes a phase transformation. It expands by 0.5%. 0.5%? I felt the blood drain from my face. Across 10,000 bolts in a vertical lattice? That's not a malfunction, that's an orchestrated collapse. The sheer force would pop the rivet heads like champagne corks. The whole frame would unzip. I looked at the bolts. They were already installed, deep in the skeleton of the building. To replace them would mean stripping the facade, halting the project for months, and defaulting on the billion-dollar loans. It would be the end of the Elena Foundation. "Leo," I whispered, "he didn't just order cheap steel, he ordered a weapon." My phone vibrated, a restricted call from the Metropolitan Detention Center. I answered. "Do you hear it yet, Eris?" My father's voice was smooth, terrifyingly calm. "It's the sound of the molecules shifting. It's a beautiful bit of engineering, isn't it? Something Leo picked up from a contact in Berlin. He always was better at the creative side of the business."
You knew, Silas. You let him install a self-destruct mechanism in a building that's supposed to house 5,000 people. I didn't let him, Eris. I simply didn't stop him. I knew you'd eventually find it, and I knew you'd realize that you can't fix this with green core or minerals. You need the original shipment of industrial-grade German steel, the one that's currently sitting in a private warehouse under a shell company. Where is it, Silas? The location for a life, Eris. My lawyers have the paperwork ready. A medical release. My heart isn't what it used to be, and the prison infirmary is drafty. Sign the release, get me moved to my private estate, and I'll give you the coordinates of the steel. You have 48 hours before the forecast hits 32 degrees. The summer wave is coming. I hung up. The air felt heavy, as if the building itself was holding its breath. I spent the next 6 hours in a frantic simulation. If I tried to replace the bolts one by one, the structural load would shift too quickly, causing a localized collapse. I needed a way to keep the building frozen, literally. Vesper, I need the city's industrial liquid nitrogen reserves, I said, calling the CEO of Vance Global at 2 a.m. Eris, that's enough to freeze the harbor. What are you planning? I'm going to turn the Aether into a giant refrigerator. If I can keep the core temperature below 20 degrees, the bolts won't expand. It buys us time to swap the steel. And the cost? The power grid won't handle it. The mayor will pull your permit the second the lights go out in the West District. Then let them pull it. I'm not letting 5,000 people become a statistic just to save a profit margin. The next morning, the city watched in confusion as massive cooling trucks surrounded the Aether. Thick white vapor began to pour from the ventilation shafts. Inside, the temperature plummeted. My construction crew worked in parkas and thermal gloves, their breath misting in the artificial winter. But Silas wasn't done. From his cell, he had triggered his second move. The bank that held the Aether loans issued an immediate audit. If the building wasn't finished on schedule, they would foreclose and take control of all assets, including my patents. He's squeezing the air out of the room, Eris, Vesper said, arriving at the site. She looked at the ice forming on the steel beams. The Entros is costing you $1 million a day. The bank is breathing down your neck, and your father is waiting for you to sign his get-out-of-jail card. I looked at the titanium drive my mother had left me. I had been digging deeper into the invisible blueprints, and I found a file I had missed. It wasn't a blueprint. It was a digital key to an offshore account Elena had kept hidden from Silas. The account didn't have money. It had leverage. It contained the dirty records of the bank's CEO, the same man who was now trying to foreclose on me. He had been laundering Thorne's quick-set concrete bribes for years. I'm not signing the release, Vesper, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. I'm going to use the Thorne standard against itself. I'm going to audit the bank. I sent the files to the CEO of the bank with a simple message. Extend the loan, drop the audit, or I release the invisible records. The response was instant. The audit was canceled. The loan was extended for 6 months. I had the money, I had the time, but I still didn't have the steel. Marcus, we're not going to wait for Silas to tell us where the warehouse is, I said. We're going to find it. My father is a creature of habit. He wouldn't pay for a new warehouse. He'd use an old one that's been off the books since the 90s. We used the ultrasound data from the nitinol bolts to trace the molecular signature of the manufacturer. It led us to a derelict shipyard in the North End. We found it. 10,000 tons of perfect German-engineered steel hidden under crates of scrap metal. But as we began to move the steel, the summer wave arrived early. The temperature outside spiked to 30 degrees. The entro systems were struggling. The building began to groan, a deep, metallic sound that vibrated in the soles of my feet. "Eris, the north pylon is shifting," Marcus screamed over the radio. "The bolts are starting to turn. We have 10 minutes before the first rivet shears." I grabbed a welding mask and a canister of liquid nitrogen. "I'm going up." "You can't. It's a death trap." "I'm the one who redesigned the core. I know which bolt is the key." I climbed the exterior scaffolding, the sun beating down on my back while the interior of the building was a freezing tomb. I reached the critical junction at the 45th floor. I could see the nitinol bolt. It was glowing with a dull, strange heat, beginning to deform like wax. I sprayed the nitrogen directly on the joint. The metal screamed as it contracted. With a heavy wrench, I forced the bolt out and slammed the German steel replacement into the hole. The building shuddered. The groans subsided into a low hum. I stood there, hanging 400 feet above the ground, looking out at the city. I hadn't signed Silas's release. I hadn't followed his script. I had rewritten the physics of the betrayal. I descended to the ground to find my father's lawyers waiting. They looked smug. "Has Miss Thorne signed the papers?" one of them asked. "The temperature is rising. Time is running out." I handed them the broken, deformed nitinol bolt. "Give this to Silas," I said. "Tell him the standard just failed, and tell him that the only heart he needs to worry about is the one he's currently using to breathe in a cell, because he's never coming out."
The most terrifying prison isn't the one with iron bars. It's the one that knows your thumbprint and your heartbeat. The ether was finally complete. The crystalline facade shimmered like a diamond against the city skyline, and the first group of elite tenants, tech moguls and high-stakes investors, were scheduled to move in for the soft launch gala. The green core was breathing, the German steel was holding, and for the first time in my life, the name Elena Foundation was synonymous with the future. But at 11 p.m., while I was doing a final walkthrough of the penthouse command center, the lights didn't just dim, they turned a predatory, pulsing red. The heavy reinforced doors hissed shut, and the magnetic locks engaged with a sound like a gunshot. "Marcus, report," I said, tapping my comms. Static was the only answer. The cellular repeaters were dead. A voice, distorted by a granular synthesizer, echoed through the hidden speakers in the ceiling. It wasn't my father. It was Leo, a pre-recorded gift from his time in the firm's IT department. "Welcome home, Iris," the voice drawled, skipping and looping like a broken record. "You always wanted the building to breathe. Well, now it's hyperventilating. I've activated the Othello protocol. In 60 minutes, the HVAC system will reverse the oxygen flow, pulling nitrogen from the industrial tanks we used for your refrigerator stunt. This isn't just a building anymore. It's an airtight tomb." I ran to the main terminal, but the screen displayed a mocking caricature of a blueprint, a maze where the exit led back to the center. Leo hadn't just hacked the system, he had embedded the virus into the firmware of the sensors. The building thought there was a catastrophic fire on every floor, triggering the total lockdown. "I designed these protocols," I hissed, pulling a manual override tool from my belt. "I know the failsafes." But every failsafe I tried had been rerouted. I pulled the emergency lever for the stairwell. The floor shifted beneath me, the mechanical plates of the kinetic foundation grinding to lock the door behind a 3-ton slab of granite. I was trapped in the 80th floor penthouse, and the air was already beginning to taste like ozone and cold chemicals. I realized then that I couldn't fight the building from the inside. I had to go into the in-between, the service crawl spaces and ventilation shafts that weren't connected to the smart network, the parts of the building that were purely mechanical. I used my laser cutter to breach the elevator shaft's maintenance hatch. Looking down, the shaft was a vertical tunnel of shadows, with the elevator cars frozen at various levels, like giant dead beetles. I began to climb down the cooling pipes, the metal burning cold through my gloves. As I descended, the building fought back. The smart lighting began to strobe, trying to induce a seizure or vertigo. The internal speakers blared a high-frequency white noise that made my teeth ache. "You're just a courier, Iris," Leo's voice whispered from a speaker on the 60th floor. "Delivery girls don't own the destination, they just carry the bags." I reached the 50th floor, the mechanical heart where the primary servers were located. The air here was thin, my lungs screaming for oxygen. I could feel the nitrogen levels rising. My vision began to blur at the edges, a dark vignette of hypoxia. I found the server room, but it was protected by a high-voltage security grid Leo had repurposed from the Vault system. One touch would be fatal. "The invisible blueprints," I muttered, pulling out the titanium drive. I didn't try to hack the server. I looked at the physical cooling lines running into the floor. In my mother's original designs, the ones Silas had never seen, there was a physical drain for the liquid coolant. If I could flood the server room with the nitrogen meant for the HVAC system, the hardware would go into a hard freeze and trigger a factory reset. I crawled under the floor tiles, my hands shaking from the lack of air. I found the manual valve. It was rusted, intentionally sabotaged with a heavy weld. I grabbed a steel pipe and used it as a lever, putting every ounce of my weight, my anger, and my history into the pull. "I am the architect," I roared, the metal snapping with a sound like a thunderclap. The liquid nitrogen surged. A cloud of white frost erupted from the floor, instantly coating the server racks in ice. The high-voltage hum died. The strobe lights stopped. For a moment, there was total silence. Then a soft, mechanical click. The doors unlocked, the fans reversed. Fresh, cool air rushed into the room, and I collapsed on the floor, gasping, my lungs burning with the sweetness of oxygen. The main terminal flickered back to life, but this time it was the standard interface, the one I had built. I didn't just stop the virus, I traced the source. The Othello protocol hadn't been uploaded from the prison, it had been triggered from an apartment in the city, an apartment owned by Vesper Vance. I felt a new kind of chill, one that nitrogen couldn't cause. Vesper hadn't just been my ally, she had been playing both sides. She wanted the ether to fail, so she could buy the ruins and my patents for nothing. She had been funding Leo's legal team and his digital sabotage. "Trust is the most expensive material in a building," I whispered, standing up and wiping the frost from my face. And I just found a crack in the foundation. I used the restored system to download the metadata of the hack. I had the IP address, the payment logs, and a recording of the final trigger command. It wasn't Leo's voice, it was Vesper's. I walked out of the building as the sun began to rise. The gala guests were arriving in 3 hours. They expected a celebration. I was going to give them an execution. I met Vesper in the lobby. She was dressed in a shimmering silver gown, holding a glass of champagne, looking like the queen of the new era. "Iris, you look exhausted," she said, her eyes scanning my soot-stained clothes. "Did you have a late night with the finishing touches?" "I had a late night with the Othello protocol, Vesper. The building tried to kill me, but it turns out I'm a very difficult tenant to evict." Vesper's smile didn't falter, but her grip on the glass tightened. "You don't know what I'm talking about, darling. Stress does strange things to the mind." "I have the logs, Vesper. I have the payment trail to Leo's Berlin contact, and I have your voice authorizing the nitrogen purge. You didn't just try to steal a building. You tried to commit mass murder." "You have nothing," she hissed, her voice dropping an octave. "My lawyers will bury those logs before the first guest arrives. I am Vance Global. You are just a thorn with a new name."
I'm not just a thorn, I said, pointing to the giant digital screen in the lobby that was supposed to show the building's eco-stats. Instead, it began to play the recording of her voice. The guests, the press, and the investors all stopped. The lobby went silent as Vesper's cold, calculated command to purge the North Wing echoed through the crystalline space. I didn't send it to your lawyers, Vesper. I sent it to the invisible network. Every architectural forum, every news outlet, and every city official just received the full audit of Vance Global. The champagne glass shattered on the marble floor. Security guards, the ones I had personally vetted after the Othello hack, stepped forward and took Vesper by the arms. The gala is still on, I announced to the stunned crowd, my voice clear and steady. But we're celebrating more than a building. We're celebrating the end of the era of secrets. Welcome to the ether.
The most complex blueprint isn't drawn on paper. It's written in blood. And blood, unlike steel, can be faked if you have enough power. The final court hearing was supposed to be a formality. With Vesper Vance in custody and the Aether stabilized, the legal path to dissolving Thorn & Sons was clear. But as I sat at the plaintiff's table, Silas Thorn walked into the courtroom not in an orange jumpsuit, but in a bespoke navy suit, looking like a man who had already won. "Your Honor," Silas's lead counsel announced, his voice slicing through the room's tension, "we move for an immediate dismissal of all claims regarding the Elena Thorn patents. New evidence has come to light. Elena Thorn is not the biological daughter of Elena and Silas Thorn. She was a legal ward whose status was never formalized. Under the specific terms of Elena's trust, the patents revert to the surviving spouse, Silas, if there is no direct biological issue." The courtroom gasped. I felt the air leave my lungs. "That's a lie," I whispered, but my voice felt small against the weight of the documents they were sliding toward the judge. "I have my birth certificate. I have my memories." "Memories are not evidence, Miss Thorn," the judge said, looking at a DNA report that had been independently verified by a lab Silas had funded for a decade. "And birth certificates can be administrative errors, unless you can provide a countersample that proves a direct link to Elena Thorn. The trust is void." I looked at Silas. He wasn't even looking at me. He was looking at the judge, a faint, victorious smirk on his face. He was willing to erase my entire existence, to call my mother a stranger, just to get his hands back on the Green Corps royalties. "You have 48 hours to produce a verified sample from Elena Thorn's remains, or a direct relative. Otherwise, the assets revert." I walked out of the court in a daze. Elena was cremated. There were no siblings. Silas had calculated this perfectly. He knew there was no biological material left to test, except for one place he had spent 20 years trying to forget: the cabin. It was a small, hand-built structure in the deep woods of the Catskills. It was the first project Elena and Silas had built together, long before the skyscrapers and the glass towers. It was where they had lived when I was born. Silas had called it a sentimental shack and forbade me from ever visiting it, claiming it was structurally unsound. "Marcus, we're going to the mountains," I said, my voice cold with a new kind of resolve. "I need to find the first foundation." We reached the cabin at midnight. It was a ruin, overgrown with ivy and moss, its cedar planks rotting under the weight of decades of neglect. But as I stepped on the porch, I felt a strange resonance. This wasn't just a house, it was a prototype. "He said it was falling apart," Marcus noted, pointing his flashlight at the beams. "But look at the joinery, Iris. This isn't falling, it's holding." I went inside. The air smelled of dry pine and old paper. I searched the floorboards, the walls, looking for anything, a hairbrush, a stray tooth, a hidden letter. Nothing. Silas had scrubbed the place clean years ago. But then I remembered the invisible blueprints. My mother didn't leave things in plain sight. She hid them in the structure. I looked at the fireplace, a massive hand-carved stone hearth. In the center was a single polished river stone that looked out of place. I pressed it. A small compartment slid open behind the mantel. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a sealed glass vial containing a lock of hair and a small dried drop of blood on a piece of gauze. To my daughter Iris. I knew Silas would try to rewrite our history. I knew he would try to claim that you were not mine, because I was the one who held the power he craved. This sample is my final gift to you, but the truth isn't just in the blood, it's in the design. I kept reading and the world shifted again. My mother hadn't just been an architect, she had been a visionary of social engineering. She had discovered that Silas was planning to use their designs for control environments, buildings designed to monitor and manipulate the behavior of the inhabitants. She fought him, and that was the real reason she disappeared from the firm's history. "Marcus, look at this," called Marcus from the basement. I went down the narrow stairs. The basement wasn't just a cellar, it was a laboratory, and in the center of the room was a small, encased model of the city. But it wasn't the city as it was the city as it could be, a network of green core buildings that shared energy, data, and resources, a true aether. And at the base of the model was a small brass plate, designed by Elena Thorne and her daughter, Iris, 1998. "She included me," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. I was a co-designer before I could even walk. But as I reached for the model, a shadow fell across the doorway. It was Leo. He had escaped his house arrest, looking haggard and desperate. He had a flare gun. "You just can't let it go, can you, Iris? Dad was right. You're a parasite. You're trying to take a legacy you didn't earn." I earned it in the sub-basement. I earned it on the gantry of the aether. While you were busy forging signatures, I was busy learning how to keep the world from falling down. "It doesn't matter," Leo said, his eyes wild. "If I can't have the patents, no one can. I'm going to burn this shack to the ground, and your evidence with it. Dad will win by default." He aimed the flare gun at the dry wooden rafters. "Leo, don't! The whole forest is a tinderbox." "Good. Let it burn. Let the Thorn name end in fire." He fired. The flare hit the old cedar and the...
My dear ones, thank you for listening to this story. It makes me incredibly happy to feel that you are here with me. I try my best for you and post new videos every day, putting a piece of myself into them. If my stories resonate with you, your subscription and viewing of other videos will be the warmest support for me and inspiration to continue telling stories.
A building is only as strong as the secret it keeps. And the city is just a collection of buildings waiting for a reason to fall. Or to stand together. The victory in the courtroom felt like a lifetime ago, though only 12 hours had passed. I was back in the Aether's command center, the master core from my mother's cabin pulsing with a steady amber light on the console. But the silence of the night was broken by a synchronized emergency broadcast. Every screen in the city, from the Times Square-style billboards to the smallest smartphone, displayed a countdown. 11:59:59. "Iris, we have a massive frequency spike in the city's substrata," Marcus shouted, his fingers flying across the diagnostic monitors. "It's not an earthquake. It's a resonant vibration coming from the foundations of the 10 largest public hospitals. The architects, they've activated the takedown protocol."
"The concrete," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. The quickset aggregate wasn't just cheap, Marcus. It was tuned. They've installed sonic emitters in the basements. If that countdown hits 0, the emitters will hit the resonant frequency of the unstable concrete. The hospitals will turn to dust in seconds. A private link opened on my main screen. A man whose face was shrouded in digital noise spoke. "Ms. Thorne, you've played a brilliant game, but the standard is bigger than one woman's inheritance. Hand over the master core encryption keys, and we will deactivate the emitters. Refuse, and you will be the architect of a graveyard." "You're not just after the patents," I said, my voice cold and steady. "You want the unified network. You want to control the energy flow of the entire eastern seaboard." "Control is the only foundation that lasts, Iris. You have 11 hours. Choose wisely." The link severed. I looked at the master core. My mother hadn't just built a self-healing concrete system, she had built a resonance shield. But it was unfinished. The code was there, but it lacked the 0 point, the final mathematical proof that would link every green core building into a single vibration-resistant lattice. "I need to find the 0 code," I said, grabbing my mother's journal. "It's not in the files. It's in the design of the city itself." I spent the next 6 hours mapping the Thorne developments in 3D. When I overlaid them with the invisible blueprints, I saw it. The buildings weren't placed randomly for profit. When viewed from above, their positions formed a massive geometric circuit. My mother had been building a city-wide protective net for 30 years, using Silas's greed to fund the placement of the nodes. The aether is the transmitter, I realized, looking at the crystalline spire above me. But the 0 code, it's not a number, it's a biometric sequence. It's the sound of a human heart synced with the building's kinetic dampers. I climbed to the very tip of the aether spire, the highest point in the city. The wind was a hurricane, the air freezing. I plugged the master core into the spire's primary emitter. "Iris, the countdown is at 10 minutes. Marcus's voice crackled through my headset. "The emitters in the hospitals are warming up. The ground is starting to hum." "I'm initiating the Elena protocol, Marcus. I'm going to use the aether to broadcast a counter frequency. We're going to neutralize the resonance." "You can't do that manually. The math is too complex. You need the 0 point." "I am the 0 point," I shouted into the wind. I placed my hand on the sensor plate. I didn't think about patents. I didn't think about Silas or Leo. I thought about the 50,000 people sleeping in those buildings. I thought about the nurses in the hospitals. I thought about my mother's voice on that tape. I closed my eyes and let my own heartbeat dictate the rhythm of the kinetic dampers. Through the biometric interface, the building began to feel my pulse. The amber light of the core turned to a brilliant, blinding white. 000100. The spire began to glow. A wave of invisible energy rippled out from the aether, washing over the city like a tide of calm. On my HUD, I saw the red zones at the hospitals begin to turn green. The emitters were still firing, but the concrete was no longer responding. The resonance shield was holding. "It's working!" Marcus screamed. "The buildings are sinking! The whole city is vibrating at the same frequency! We've created a solidarity matrix!" The countdown hit 0. There were no explosions, no dust clouds, just a long, low hum that sounded like a deep, collective sigh of relief. The architect's emitters burned out, overloaded by the counter-surge I had sent through the grid. On the screen, the digital face appeared again. The noise was gone. The man looked stunned. You've linked the entire city. You've made the infrastructure public property. You've destroyed the Standard." "The Standard was a cage," I said, looking into the camera. "The Elena Foundation is a bridge, and you're officially evicted." I triggered the final command. The master core didn't just protect the buildings, it uploaded the architects' financial signatures, the ones they used to power the emitters, directly to the Global Financial Audit Office. By morning, their assets would be frozen, their names public, and their Standard erased from history. I climbed down from the spire as the sun began to rise over a city that was finally, truly standing on its own. Epilogue: The Unfiltered Skyline. 1 year later. The Thorn Building is gone. In its place stands the Elena Center for Urban Integrity. We don't just build skyscrapers here, we teach the world how to build foundations that don't need secrets to stand upright. Silas Thorn died in prison 6 months ago. Leo is still serving time, though he's reportedly become the best librarian the correctional system has ever seen. Vesper Vance's company was absorbed by the foundation, its resources repurposed for low-income housing that uses the Green Core technology for free. My name is Iris Thorn. I was a courier, a ghost, and a target. But now I am the architect of a world where the walls don't have to hide the truth to keep us safe. The audit is complete. The foundation is solid. And for the first time in my life, the view from the bottom is even better than the view from the top.